Today we're going to tackle the sensitive topic of immigration. It's an issue that's been very polarizing in our country and something that's also divided the faithful. Do we have all the right answers? I'm not sure we do, but we're going to talk about what we do know and hopefully provide you with some information to make informed choices. Let's dive in on Finding Communion. Hello, welcome to Finding Communion. I'm Rosemary Ford, editor of Parable Magazine, and I'm here with Bob Dunn, the Director of Public Policy for the Diocese of Manchester. This podcast and the column of the same name in Parable Magazine discuss the Church's work in the public square as well as the intersection of politics and faith. Bob, people say the two things you're not supposed to talk about are religion and politics. So, of course, for us, what we did was we created a column about religion and politics and then this podcast about religion and politics. So there you go.
And my job.
There you go. So, let's just dive right in, and we're going to talk today about the Catholic response to immigration. Let's start with historically. What has the Church's response been?
When we think about migration, we have to start with the greatest migration that ever happened, and that was the migration of Jesus Christ to be born of a human mother and to live among us. The great migration between the divine and the human.
That makes a lot of sense. It's true.
And the scriptures are the story of migrations. We see all through the Old Testament, peoples are wandering. The people of Israel are wandering in the desert for 40 years. Jesus tells us that the Son of Man has no place to lay his head. And so this is in the issue of migration and wandering peoples is something that is in our DNA. Mm-hmm. From an American perspective, the Catholic Church obviously has largely been an immigrant church. For most of us, especially here in the Northeast, we are the children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren of immigrants. My grandfather emigrated from Ireland at the beginning of the 20th century. I'm only the second generation born here in this country. Mm-hmm. And many of those immigrant populations came from Catholic countries. So the church in the Northeast in particular, and this is true in other parts of the country, I'm a parochial Boston Catholic, so I see things through the prism of that experience. But the church has developed in this country and has continued to be a church of immigrants. So we have a historical understanding and experience that hopefully gives us as Catholics something of an expertise in trying to figure out what do we do with the issue of immigration.
That makes a lot of sense. As you mentioned, I'm a great-grandchild of immigrants, and, the church was essential in their lives. They arrived in the early 1900s, and, my grandmother attended a school where half the day was in Italian and half the day was in English, and it was the same throughout the city of Lawrence, Massachusetts. There were different Catholic schools that taught, half days in English and half days in another language, because public schools weren't doing English as a second language at that time. So the church stepped in and they helped generations acclimate to this country until they weren't needed in the same way. So, the church's presence in the immigrant community has been a powerful one from the very earliest days of our country. Let's also talk about undocumented immigrants. What is the church's stance on that and the legality of immigration here?
The starting point is obviously the fundamental principle of Catholic social teaching, and that is the principle of human dignity. Every human being is a possessor of immense and unalienable, undiminishable human dignity as a child of God and as an image bearer. We hear in the book of Genesis that we're created in the image and likeness of God. And so we must look on all other people whoever they are, wherever they come from, whatever their circumstances, they are fellow image bearers. And in fact, especially for those who are poor, as Pope Leo quoted in his recent apostolic exhortation, he quoted St. Augustine, who said that the poor are the sacramental presence of the Lord. We, as sharers in the Eucharist, need to look at everything that we do through the prism of the Eucharist. Mm-hmm. And the Eucharist, of course, is the sacrament of communion. It is the thing that binds us to other Catholics, it binds us to God, and it binds us to all other human beings in a way that is more powerful than any other affiliation can possibly be. So we start from that premise as Catholics. Now, the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops has developed a set of principles that they ask us to consider and to advance when we think about immigration and how we move forward on the question of immigration. Mm-hmm. One of the things that the bishops recognize, and I suspect that every other person in the United States, whoever they are, would agree with this, is that our immigration system in the United States is deeply broken. Yeah. And it has been over the course of decades at this point. So there is no need to be pointing the finger at one party or another as being responsible for the breakdown of the immigration system in the country. We actually, I suppose, can point the finger at ourselves as citizens that we haven't had the political will over these past decades to come up with an immigration system which is, as the bishops urge, is a comprehensive reform of an immigration system which is just and orderly and humane. So
that makes sense.
That's the first place. The bishops also recognize that nations have a right to protect their borders and to enforce their borders. So oftentimes you hear people suggesting that the U.S. bishops are in favor of open borders. That is simply not true.
Yeah.
The bishops also ask that immigration enforcement be targeted, proportional, and humane. We don't treat speeders the same way that we treat people who hold up armored cars.
I would hope not.
Just the way it is, right? So the bishops ask us to recognize that there's a difference between different types of people who are here and are undocumented. The bishops, naturally enough, ask us to focus on families and to hold family unification and reunification as a primary goal in an immigration system. Mm-hmm. And one of the most important things, and we, I think, kind of forget about this in all of the immigration debates that go on, is that we need to address the root causes of immigration. One of the things that we have to remember is that people who undergo almost superhuman efforts to travel for months through jungles and to cross rivers, to put their lives at risk. They endure incredible hardships to come to this country. They don't do that simply because they want to grab a piece of the American dream. They're doing it because the conditions in their home countries have gotten to such a point where their lives are at stake in many cases. And so
it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking when you hear some of these stories.
So for people to make the decision to leave their homes and to undergo those hardships to get here, we need to think about those reasons that cause them to migrate. And it would be to the benefit of migrants if they didn't have to do that. And Pope Francis, especially in the last few years of his life, began to talk a lot about the rights that people have to migrate when necessary, but also the right to not have to migrate. And it's really incumbent on us as a nation, in the eyes of the U.S. bishops, to do what we can to help to create conditions in other countries where people don't feel the need to have to leave. So I hope we'll put that USCCB document in the show notes, because it will, I think, clear up a lot of things and show what I think is a very thoughtful and sophisticated approach to immigration reform. And at the same time is not the bishops trying to intrude on the political process by saying, here is a 75-page plan for how we're going to do this. It's saying, here are the principles, political world, please go about doing this in this particular way. So I'd encourage folks to take a look at that.
It sounds like a great thing to read for some clarity about those issues. But, to sum it up, basically they're asking people to use common sense, have a little kindness, compassion, and empathy, and approach it that way. And I mean, that approach just makes so much sense to me. Am I right with that? Is that
empathy is the word? Because, look, immigration reform, how we go forward as a nation on this, is an unbelievably complicated thing. And it's going to be. But what we can do as a starting point, especially as Catholics, is to have some empathy for these folks who, after all, are doing exactly what our own grandparents did for exactly the same reasons, and what we ourselves would do if confronted by those circumstances in our home country.
Bob, you've had some experience with this topic too. You visited the southern border and talked to people there about this, so you have firsthand knowledge. Do you want to talk a little bit about that and share some of what you learned there?
I can't say too much about firsthand knowledge to any great degree, but I did go to the southern border a year ago last summer, and had the opportunity to meet with a family that had just arrived in Texas from South America the day before. And these folks, it was a mother and a father and a young boy. They had left home months earlier because the lives of their children were threatened. And they had come up on foot largely, and come up through Mexico and arrived at this large camp that exists on the Mexican side of the crossing at McAllen, Texas, and waited to get the message for when they would have their meeting with U.S. immigration officials. And they were allowed in on a temporary basis until their claims could be adjudicated. And it was apparent, I think, from talking to these folks and hearing their story that they had left not because they wanted to just come to America, but because the conditions in their hometown and in their home nation had reached a point where that was their only alternative.
Their lives are at stake, basically.
Their lives were at stake.
Yeah.
And to me, the image that keeps coming back is the image of the lifeboats on the Titanic, right? To these folks, the U.S. was the last lifeboat off the Titanic. And this comes back to that issue that we talked about earlier. If the conditions in their home country had been otherwise, then they would never have been subjected to the dangers of the journey, and they would never have even presumably thought about coming to this country. Yeah. So if we can help to create conditions where people don't have to migrate, then that's going to be a big first step in how we deal with the immigration crisis in this country in a humane and just way.
Gotcha. And those are the key words there, I think, for everyone. Humane and just way, seriously. So as a Catholic, how are we supposed to navigate the current moment? What would you advise?
The first thing we have to do as Catholics is to not engage in vilification and mockery and condemnation. We need to approach this mindful of the fact that the folks who are here, immigrants, whether they're here on a documented or an undocumented basis, they all possess human dignity, and they're all fellow image bearers. Let's keep all of that in mind.
Exactly.
We have to have empathy, because there but for the grace of God go we. And we need to engage in the public square in a constructive way where we are keeping in mind that the Eucharist calls us to the transformation of every aspect of our lives, including the public square. And so oftentimes I think we can feel that we're mired in this situation where we've got this immigration problem that seems unsolvable.
Overwhelming. Yeah.
And overwhelming. But we are all about being transformational. And so we need to work to try to figure out ways that we can move forward and be bringers of solidarity and communion and mercy, just as Jesus himself was.
That makes a lot of sense. Bob, another fascinating discussion. Thank you so much. And thank you all for joining us here on Finding Communion. Please see our show notes for more on this topic. And don't forget to check out the latest edition of Parable Magazine. You can find it online at catholicnh.org/parable. And if you enjoyed this podcast, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you so much. See you later.